So, welcome everybody to this edition of the Purple Knights podcast. And this time around, I'm joined by Jaymes Buckman of the Canadian glam rock group Hot Apollo. Welcome, Jaymes, to the Purple Knights podcast.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Excited.
Yes, it's very it's not often that I get to talk to unique artists such as yourself. So I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on performance and also on the role flamboyance plays in that as well. So, and we definitely know Prince was a flamboyant stage performer, especially early on in his career. And I know in the early 80s he adopted a persona called the Rude Boy. So we can talk a little bit about that as we go along. But Jaymes, why don't you tell me about your history as a musician and performer and how Apollo got started?
So there are a bunch of layers to that. Um, I remember like when I was a kid. I always had that sort of classic problem of just like too much energy, which is a bit of a theme like throughout my life. And but I didn't have a a sort of codified outlet for dealing with that. So I would do things like jumping up like during the slow moment in class at school and just like bursting into song on my table, which got me in trouble with teachers and stuff. But just something I got like a charge out of. Um, and I didn't realize that was at the time that was, well, maybe I did, I don't know, on some level, but that was clearly going to set me up to be um, uh, a singer later in life. Like that was always on some level what I was meant to do. Now, around like high school kind of area, after being in a few bands that went nowhere because no one else seemed to have the ability to sustain the level of dedication and drive that art takes. I just focused on poetry for a while because I could do that by myself without relying on other people who can potentially disappoint. But of course, later, you learn that anything uh, worth going after always carries the risk of disappointment. It's like love in that way. I think you've got to wade through a lot of bad dates before you find that romantic connection you're seeking, kind of thing. And I think music's the same way. Musical partnerships.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I decided to give it another go for a few reasons. Like, first of all, there's a whole thing where like making it in any sort of material sense in any art well, in the music industry specifically, um, you have to be like very lucky to make like any real sort of money from it. But if you're just like a poet, you can be that lucky and still need a second job. So for that reason by itself, music's a slightly better bet. But also just I still write poetry and I still want to like publish professionally at some point. But there's a charge I get from being on stage and performing uh, like rock and roll that is not uh, matched in any way by poetry or really any other kind of performance. I appreciate all of it, all types of performance and engaging in it on different levels, but getting up on stage and singing my words with electric guitar is a feeling like no other. And it's what I have to. It's what my life's direction is. It's what my life's purpose is. So yeah, that was a sort of circuitous, multifaceted uh, summary of my journey towards rock and roll frontmanship.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and I would agree. Music is an exchange of energy, right? It's the exchange of energy between the artist and the audience. And there's not really a thing you can compare to the thrill of live performances, putting your energy out there and having it reflected back to you by the audience, right? So that's a great way experience the flow of energy between artist and audience. So when did you actually start up Hot Apollo then? How did that come about?
So first, I just want to say that that was a great way of putting that the flows of energy between that was very beautiful, and
Thank you
accurate.
so much.
Um, but so I there's this guy on the street I grew up on. He was a neighbor friend, and he went to art school near me after high school, and he met this guy, and he kept saying like, James, you've got to meet this guitarist. I uh, I think you guys would get along so well. I think he'd be a sort of good counterpart to what you're trying to do. When I was like first starting to think about getting back into music, and he kept trying to set up meetings between us. And over the course of like several months, like at least 2 or 3 seasons, those every meeting fell through. And then finally, we happened to meet on April Fool's Day, and within a half hour, we'd written our first song, which is actually just went into the studio to record it for our next album a few weeks ago. But yeah, that was the first song we ever wrote together, and like since then I was in. That was the sort of genesis of Hot Apollo, um, and I've never looked back. Like as soon as I got in, I just thought, all right, cool, I'm locked in. This is for better or worse. Like this is what's happening. This is my life now.
Very, very nice. I'm I don't know about you, James, but I'm the type of person that I believe there are really no coincidences. I believe things happen for a reason and a purpose. And the fact that your meetings were, previously delayed several times and then it just happened to work out just like that is kind of uh beautiful in a way because it kind of shows the power of the universe and destiny and fate and all that coming together for to realize a dream. So I can definitely resonate with that, and it's very, very cool how that came to be. Well, how would you describe the music you make with Hot Apollo?
Um, I tend to describe it as an extension of my being. It's uh, it it's music that sounds the way I feel, the way I look. It's shiny, it's sparkly, it's outrageous, flamboyant, um, impossible to ignore. Uh, and it's also uh, I've been told sometimes that I have a very like a sort of voice when I speak that's like hard to place, um, and especially when I sing too. And I think that's sort of true of our music. Like people try to make comparisons um, between our music and historical acts, and they like it's never like quite uh, it's impossible to do with any sort of precision. And I think that speaks to the uniquity of our sound. It's like you can probably like relate it to aspects of other things, but the whole of our sound is very specific to Hot Apollo. And I think that that's sort of I'm pleased with the fact that happens so naturally. In the way I sing, in the way I helped like write the songs, and just the way even the way like I my lyrical voice comes out. So yeah, I that talk about destiny. I think that the fact that that just like flowed so naturally is one of our greatest strengths as a band.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And I would say that just by checking out your work very briefly, I would say that there's no really way to qualify it or quantify it, being like any one particular thing. There's elements of different acts that I could definitely see in there. There's elements of David Bowie, certainly. There's elements of uh, 80s new wave bands like Oingo Boingo, who I
I've
love,
never see that's the thing.
and the Cars, who I love. Working on Love, the track that I'm going to do a preview of at the end of this podcast for all my viewers and listeners. really made me think of the Cars quite a bit. And the Cars are one of my favorite new wave 80s bands. And just the melody of it made me really think of the Cars, and your vocal cadence as well made me think really think of Rick Ocasek in a really cool way. So that was really cool. That's probably my favorite song of yours that I've heard so far, but I'm sure there's a whole rabbit hole I could go down and check out your stuff. But yeah, I really think it's a really unique sound, and good for you, man, for going after your dream and expressing your creativity and expressing who you are through music and lyrics as well.
But yeah, see, that's those comparisons you made. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like when people like make comparisons, like they it's rarely like the same one. It's always like something different. Like I've never heard comparisons to Oingo Boingo or the Cars before, but yeah, I think I can see what you're saying. So that's like interesting. Everyone like I think maybe it's because everyone's hit by a different aspect of her music or whatever,
Right,
and it
right,
hits every person differently. And it's like people like pull out these wild points of reference, and it's always surprising and like also interesting to hear um, what jumps out at different people.
right, right.
Yeah.
But I think that's the mark of great art in a sense is that it can defy genres, it can defy defy labels and just sort of be its own thing or a hybrid of many different things. And I think that's the mark of great art. So I in that sense I really uh respect what you do because it's unique and it's original and it's different and it's unique to you, which is very special because I always I champion the individuality of artists. And like for me, when I was younger, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write novels, but I've struggled with depression and feelings of inadequacy my whole life because it basically stems from the fact that I was born 3 months premature and I have cerebral palsy. I'm in a wheelchair. Um, I can't walk, so I've always felt self-conscious and really afraid of failure and really afraid to put myself out there. And it's been like these past 2 years have really been a period of great growth for me. And this podcast is a big part of it too, talking to people who are passionate about music and passionate about, their own independent spirits and passionate about, have putting their voices out in the world to communicate things that are uniquely them and, you know, communicating their heart and soul in a way that's unique to them. So I really appreciate that and really resonate with it. So uh, I appreciate you coming on the show. And I thought we could talk a little bit about what uh, what Prince means to you in terms of an independent artist. Like you said, before we got on the show, you said his willful expression of flamboyance, I believe, is is close to how you put it. Can you talk a little bit more about how that inspires you and feeds into your own personal sense of creativity and expression?
Yeah, totally. Now, first of all, I do want to say that like feelings of inadequacy and insecurity are almost intrinsically tied to artistry. Like on some of it at least. I mean, I can say that there have been times in my life when like my art was the only thing I was sure of, and apart from that, I was like totally down on myself. So like art was like basically my savior in that in those instances. But anyway, so I do definitely want to commend you on like uh, finding the courage and strength to like put your voice out there by this platform. So that's huge. And also, I do want to maybe talk to me about this later. But I'm curious about your novel and what kind of stuff you want to like do with that. But anyway, yes, Prince. Um, yeah, I mean, I remember like just like seeing even like clips of him when I was like a very little kid, and again, he stuck out as one of those people who was like no other person I'd seen. He was like uh, basically unmistakable as the person he was, and I think there was something striking about a sort of duality I noticed in him. Like mainly, I think I remember catching Purple Rain, the movie, on television when I was like a really little kid, and uh, I think I walked in during the middle of it, and the first scene was I think he was in his apartment or like backstage. It's been like a long time since this like early memory, but he was like very like soft spoken, and he seemed to be just like quietly working through some kind of neurosis. But then like he pops up on stage, and he's this like beacon of uh, like electric energy, and like the entire like venue is like feeling it and captivated by it, and that sort of uh, like multifaceted persona like really like made me curious, and I think that was like the first uh, time I like remember like consciously like wondering about what this guy's deal was, and I that start I think that might have been what started me on the path like looking into it.
Yeah, and to to kind of go off that, I mean, as I alluded to earlier in his career, like pre Purple Rain, Prince would do things on stage, um, you know, suggestive body movements and dancing and stuff like that, and allusions in his lyrics to sexual acts to to just sort of push the envelope and see what he can get away with as a young artist looking to express his individuality and also just to simply to shock people. Do you think that's an intrinsic part of art is to sort of shock people and get them talking in a way?
So I don't know that I would say that art has to set out to do that, but
Right.
I think I think it's almost a prerequisite um, of an artist to be willing to transgress anything if that is what the piece requires.
Okay.
Uh, I at least that's how I approach it. Like I'm always going to make art that is like the most honest manifestation of what I feel and what that piece is supposed to be. And I can't let that be bound by uh, anyone else's restrictions, structures, or rules. It has to be what that piece wants to be. And if some people react uh, with shock, or even like revulsion, like that's none of my concern because my task is to make the piece what it's supposed to be.
Right. So you're looking at it basically on a piece by piece basis, or do you think as a whole an artist's body of work can represent uh, what do I want to say? What am I getting at? Can represent a way of pushing the envelope as a whole body of work, or do you think it's normally on a piece by piece basis, or do you think it's like a maybe a blend of both at times? Uh,
I think that a big part of a lot of artists is, I mean, a lot of artists that anyone's heard of are heard of because they were making something new. And whenever you're making something new, there are inevitably going to be people who uh, don't respond uh, with immediate warmth to it. Like it is a, an
Right.
instinctual feature of the animal brain to be wary of what is unfamiliar. So
Right.
if you are doing that as an artist, there are going to be people who don't dig it. I mean, listen, I'm not actually very good at reading people, but like even when I'm just walking around the city with like a friend or something, like sometimes they'll tell me, "Hey, like that person over there is really giving you like a dirty look. That person is like just like shooting daggers into your soul." And I don't notice, but I'm told that, and it's because of the way I present. It's because some people are let even in a big city like Toronto, there are people who don't think people should look like me, um, and
Right.
uh, and it's because I'm something that they don't uh, encounter so consistently. I'm something that's not familiar to them. I'm not something that's part of their world. So they see
Right.
me, and that sort of animal like uh, brain like instinct kicks in, and they they react as they do. That's just because I'm unfamiliar, and I think the same is true of art. But as I am willing to, yeah, it's the same. The way I approach my own life is the same way I approach art. It's like I've got to be uh, always willing to be true to myself and true to my art. And so inevitably, when that's something people are familiar with, there are going to be a few people who aren't feeling it, and they're going to respond with some form of negative emotion. But that is really on them, and
Right.
no artist or person should let that stop them.
Right. Right on. And I'm reminded of a quote that Prince gave, I believe, in the mid '80s, and I don't know it exactly word for word, so I'm paraphrasing. But what he said was basically, uh, "My responsibility is the hardest one, and that's the responsibility to be true to myself." So that speaks to exactly what you're saying, James. Is you want to in your art and in everything, you want to be true to yourself, uh, true to the message that you want to put out there, and yeah, I really respect that, and I'm really going into that myself. I've had people stare me down as well for because I look different and I present different because because of my disability, and so I totally resonate with that and empathize with that. But it's like if Prince's attitude also was, if people come along for the ride and if they dig it, that's cool. If they don't, that's cool too. All you can do is be true to yourself and be true to your soul and be true to your vision. So, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So that second quotation makes a lot of sense to me. That's quite in line with my philosophy. The first one um, is actually quite surprising, especially from Prince, because I will say, he said it was the hardest responsibility.
Right,
For me, the hardest thing that I could imagine doing would be uh, hiding myself or compromising myself. Like I mean, on the rare occasions in the past when I've tried to like get like a sort of normal day job that required or at least implicitly requested a sort of toning down of the person I am, it was basically impossible. Like I tried and I was not good at it. Like people saw right through, and it felt incredibly uncomfortable, uh, even in the attempt. So like the idea of like not being fully uh, myself at all times is the hardest thing I could imagine doing, and it's not something I would like to do. So, and then maybe I'm projecting, but uh, I think if you'd asked me, I think I would have expected Prince to be closer to that than to say that he had to like fight to be himself. But I mean, I don't know when he said that. Maybe he said that at a far earlier stage of his life or something. But yeah, so that's actually very interesting to hear
I
about
I
Prince.
believe
But he did
I
it anyway.
I believe he did. I believe he said it in the early 80s. So it would be just a few years into his career before Purple Rain and all that. So I'm sure like all of us, he changed and, grew and evolved over time to sort of, be more authentic to himself and be more authentic to what his soul was telling him to do and be, which is, one of the major life lessons I've learned from Prince and still continue to learn. And I also learned it from artists such as yourself, Jaymes, is, you know, you have to you have to be true to yourself. You have to put yourself first in a way that you're loving yourself. You're putting your best self out there for people to see and engage with. And if they dig it, that's okay. If they don't dig it, that's okay too. As long as we're true to ourselves, that's the most important thing we can do. So
Yeah.
I really believe that. And yeah, that's why Prince has been a huge inspiration to me. He has a lot of the qualities, well, some of the qualities that I actually see in myself, as far as the way with words and the way with lyrics and poetry that Prince had with his lyrics. Um, I like to think that I can express myself rather eloquently and succinctly and artistically. And, but he also possesses qualities that I wish I had or that I aspire to, like, that boldness, that being uniquely him and that willingness to stand out and push the envelope and basically not care what anybody else thinks, uh, as long as he's being true to himself and true to the artistic vision that he has for his art. So yeah, he's been a very inspirational artist to me. And are there any other ways that you can think of that Prince has really been an example to you?
Um. Hmm. I one of the things I like about him, and maybe this speaks to that progression we were talking about, where he was initially, perhaps due to circumstances, um, more reluctant to be himself. It was harder for him initially, but like later in life, he was like completely suited to uh, living in a sort of slice of the world of his own making,
Right,
where like it wasn't he wasn't struggling to be true to himself in a world created around him. He was using the force of his own unadulterated self to shape the world immediately around him into one where he was a natural fit. And like
right,
because a lot of the stories I've heard about him were in his later life. And someone once said that like he was playing a show in like Detroit or something. And after the show, it was like 2 in the morning, and he asked for like someone to bring him a giraffe or something, in the way that someone might ask for someone to bring them a pizza. And it was because he didn't quite grasp why uh, anything should be denied him, and why there would be any reason for which a giraffe could not be delivered to Prince at 2 in the morning in Detroit. Um, and I think that
hey,
speaks to uh, his embrace of um, the force of one's own unadulterated personality,
right,
because if you like are like if you cease to be what other people want you to be, even if that's just someone who fits into the world everyone else lives in, then you can become um, something greater, And in his case, he became, uh, a legend, really, and he achieved the ability to create his own slice of the world, and that world was one in which uh, it would not be too far outside of the bounds of reasonable expectation to think that a giraffe at 2 in the morning in Detroit would be something uh, that could be asked for, you know? So that like that is a sort of uh, that's something that like makes a sort of sense to me. And seeing him live out there like that reinforces some of the ways I naturally think of the world
Right.
and
Like,
what world I make around myself.
right. Like creating and manifesting your own reality. He, Prince, later in life, he urged everybody to, use their thoughts to create the kind of world that they wanted to live in. Like you were saying, James, like that's what he did. And that's what he, um, wanted for everybody else, especially creative people, especially uh, underrepresented and maybe uh, you know people that were looked down upon or looked at in a different way by society. He wanted people to be able to create their own world and manifest through thoughts and stuff like that. So yeah, it speaks to what you're saying. He was able to create his own world in which he was the perfect fit. So yeah, that's another aspect of Prince that I really resonate with and really aspire to. Well, tell me what's next for James Buckman and for Hot Apollo.
Um, right now, so we just put out our first like full length album uh, recently. We've like we have a lot of stuff online wherever you find music, iTunes, Bandcamp, Spotify, wherever we're on there. Hot Apollo is on there, um, and we've like had like music videos, singles, and stuff for a while, even an EP. But this is our first like full length, and uh, it's epic as hell. And like within like I think 5 days of releasing it, I was already back in the studio to start work on next year's album. So that's I'm actually gonna be back in there tomorrow to continue. So that's the next like that's probably the next milestone if I had to guess. But as of today, we were just we played a street show at a place called CDs on Friday, and today we just got booked in to play a place called Tale of the Junction on November 4th. If anyone's around the Toronto area, that's like our next immediate uh, landmark. But just in a sort of general sense, Hot Apollo is all about pushing our glorious sound uh, and sight into the furthest reaches of the cosmos and to let it hit people as it will, and I think in a lot of cases it's going to hit well. So if you have, I mean, if you listen to this podcast, I think there's going to be at least something in that that you'll appreciate. So I definitely recommend checking us out. But yeah, it's something I can't stop. So what's next for me is always going to be doing this, singing rock and roll uh, in the most honest, truthful, and uh, flamboyantly epic way I know how.
Right on, right on. And are you gonna keep going with your poetry as well?
Yes, it's I've never stopped that either. There's even I haven't like really because like music is like my main focus. I haven't really done much yet to seek out like professional publication, but a lot of selections from my written poetry are available on my personal website, hotapollo.com. So if you want to check it out, there's some good stuff on there. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I feel as though uh, poetry is something that's much easier to sell and market, even to publishers, when you're famous for something else. Like you look at people like Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, like they're like the biggest names in poetry because they're big names elsewhere, and so people think, oh, cool, we get to sell a book by Bob Dylan, and Leonard Cohen. Like, let's do it. What? Oh, it's poetry. That's weird. Poetry never sells, but this will because it's by Bob Dylan, and Leonard Cohen. So, I think my like first goal is to make a name as a rock and roll singer, and then that'll make it far easier to just publish the written word without too many hoops to jump through.
Okay, cool. Well, I know you guys. I promised you guys a clip of the Hot Apollo single "Working on Love" at the end of the podcast, and we're going to get to that shortly. But before we do that, I'd just like to say to Jaymes, thank you so much for appearing on the podcast, and thank you so much for talking with me. And if you want to talk outside of the podcast, we can certainly do that as well. I would like to continue conversing about, you know, artistic expression and all that, because I think you're a very magnetic personality. You're very well spoken, very intelligent. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a joy. Thank you
Okay,
for having me.
thank you so much. And this is Chris Johnson for Jaymes Buckman and myself. I'd like to say thank you for watching or listening wherever you're partaking in this podcast, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Peace and be wild. Bye bye.
What's bringing you through when the haze gets hot? What's raising your days and tossing your thoughts? What's lying in wait when you're ready for night? What's telling you to leave on the light? Working on love. Working on love, love. Working on love. Working on love. Working on love, working on love. It's the rage in your veins and the song in your scream. It's the tune of your truth and the shape of your dream.